Hello, everyone, and thanks so much for being with us today. I'm Eric Ham, and we're in Washington, D.C. And today on First Post America, we've got more from the UN General Assembly, as well as the latest in rising tensions between Caracas and Washington. All this and more on the way, but first, a look at the latest headlines. U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer says that America expects to finalize new trade deals with several Southeast Asian countries in the coming months, as he made the remarks during a meeting with ministers from the ASEAN bloc in Malaysia's Kuala Lumpur. Iran says its oil sales to China will continue even if UN sanctions are reinstated, as Tehran and European powers work to reach a deal to prevent renewed restrictions. A Spanish military jet carrying the country's defense minister experiences a GPS disturbance while flying near Russia's Kaliningrad enclave, raising concerns about Moscow's interference with navigation systems. Taiwan's premier calls for an inquiry into evacuation failures after flooding from a breached mountain lake during Super Typhoon Ragaza left 14 people dead. And social media platform X urges a delay to Australia's social media ban for those under 16, citing serious legal concerns over the punitive policy. The company notes that less than 1% of its Australian users are actually under the age of 16, while emphasizing the importance of protecting children online. We began with the latest developments from the United Nations General Assembly, where Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has said that President Donald Trump could change the course of the conflict with Russia, adding that Washington is in fact prepared to offer Ukraine security guarantees once the war comes to an end.
Trump is a game changer by himself if he will be sure in Ukraine, and I think that he is more closer now to this situation, and that's why, and between us, only Trump can. For today, we know some not too much players in the world who can be game changers, but he's the most closer to this.
President Zelensky made these remarks to journalists after the meeting with President Donald Trump on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly in New York. His comments came shortly after Trump himself delivered an unusually upbeat assessment of Ukraine's prospects, writing on Truth Social that Russia was facing what he called a big economic trouble, and that Ukraine, with the backing of Europe and NATO, could be in a position to win back all of its territory. In his post, President Trump said that Russia's fighting in Ukraine is making the country look like a paper tiger.
With time, patience, and the financial support of Europe and, in particular, NATO, the original borders from where this war started is very much an option. Why not? Russia has been fighting aimlessly for 3.5 years, a war that should have taken a real military power less than a week to win. This is not distinguishing Russia. In fact, it is very much making them look like a paper tiger.
The Kremlin on Wednesday rejected President Trump's claim that Russia was a paper tiger, saying the economy was stable, though conceding there were some problems with growth. It also said there is no alternative for Russia than to continue its offensive in Ukraine. And Trump's recent post marks a shift in his previous stance, which suggested that Kyiv might have to consider giving up land in order to secure peace, a position that's raised concerns in Ukraine about possible back-channel talks legitimizing Russia's occupation. Now, for Zelensky, Trump's latest remarks signal what he called a big shift in Washington's position. And he said the meeting with the U.S. president had been positive, even though he couldn't share all the details.
My impression was good of conversation, and I was positive about understanding. I'm not president of the United States. I can't tell you that President Trump will do everything what we want or what we need. I don't know. But he was looking positively on the topics, what we shared, and on influence these topics on the way to peace. and on real deep meaning of all these cases, what we shared. If it is difficult to explain in English when I don't want to share everything, and that's why I'm trying to explain. Sorry.
Zelensky also stressed the influence China's stance can have on the war, emphasizing that if Beijing truly wanted the fighting to stop, it could exert pressure on Russia's President Putin.
If China truly wanted this war to stop, it could compel Moscow to end the invasion. Without China, Putin's Russia is nothing. Yet too often, China stays silent and distant instead of active for peace.
Now, speaking at a Security Council session, Zelensky and his allies pressed Russia to halt its invasion and return to negotiations. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said President Trump has invested tremendous time and energy in trying to broker a settlement, but he went on to say that Trump's patience was not infinite. The UN Secretary General, too, addressed the situation, saying that peace efforts have been moving very slow.
The president is a very patient man. He's very committed to peace, but his patience is not infinite. And as he has said repeatedly, he has before him the opportunity and the options of imposing additional economic costs on the Russian Federation, if necessary, in order to bring this to an end.
But progress on a much-needed ceasefire and a lasting peaceful settlement remains painfully slow. Every day of continued fighting undermines the chances for diplomacy to succeed and increases the dangers of further escalation.
Now, meanwhile, China's ambassador to the UN said that the country has been holding an impartial position since the conflict began.
President, since the first day of the crisis, China has been upholding an objective and impartial position, calling for a ceasefire and cessation of hostilities, and advocating for peace talks towards a political settlement. Guided by the four truths put forward by President Xi Jinping, we have maintained close communication with parties concerned, sent our special envoys for shuttle diplomacy, and together with Brazil and other countries of the Global South, initiated the Group of Friends for Peace in order to consolidate a cause for peace, promote consensus on peace, and advance peace efforts.
Now, Moscow, however, rejected the idea that the meeting between Trump and Zelensky meant any real shift. Russia's deputy ambassador to the UN dismissed the statements made by the Western leaders, accusing them of recycling rhetoric that he said had nothing to do with peace.
It is very much lamentable that the membership of the Security Council has been compelled today to spend time and be present at a meeting which was initiated by our European colleagues purely to mark the latest New York stop on a tour of the well-known former actor. And here we see squeezed in is during the subway at rush hour, where we hear and will continue to hear mere replicated statements which have nothing to do with the truth. There is no added value for the establishment of peace in Ukraine.
Still, only time will tell if the latest words by President Trump signal a turning point, or will we get an about-face once again from the president? And now moving to South America, where armed members of Venezuela's civilian militia took to the streets of Caracas on Tuesday, parading through the capital's main avenues while holding rifles and chanting patriotic slogans. The march was addressed by the Venezuelan defense minister, who stressed unity and preparedness, warning, quote, "We are not playing around."
We are not playing around here. We are not here to recreate ourselves in time and space. No, we are getting ready. That preparedness, dear comrades, brothers and sisters, is about unity, and it's also about all the people of Venezuela, in the right moment, moves towards armed fight to defend this fatherland centimeter by centimeter.
Nos estamos preparando.
The demonstration comes amid heightened tensions with the United States following a series of strikes by U.S. forces targeting alleged drug smuggling vessels in the Caribbean. Now, Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro announced plans for a constitutional framework to protect Venezuela from potential foreign invasions, emphasizing that all citizens and institutions would mobilize if the country faced threats.
Every citizen of this country has the backing, protection, and the activation of all forces of Venezuelan society to answer the threats, or if that were the case, to any attack against our beautiful, heroic, historic Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela.
In And the situation escalated when President Trump shared footage of the Venezuelan militia training on his Truth Social account, sarcastically warning, quote, a very serious threat. He also posted a separate message claiming the Venezuelan government was sending criminals and psychiatric patients into the United States, threatening severe consequences if they were not removed. In fact, earlier on Tuesday, President Trump addressed the UN General Assembly defending the strikes as part of the U.S. anti-drug operations and vowing to obliterate drug smugglers, while critics accused the actions of being extrajudicial killings. Now, since early September, more than a dozen people are reported to have died in the attacks, with some victims suspected to be Colombian.
Call them the water drugs. They kill hundreds of thousands of people. Tren de Aragua's from Venezuela, by the way. Such organizations torture, maim, mutilate, and murder with impunity. They're the enemies of all humanity. For this reason, we've recently begun using the supreme power of the United States military to destroy Venezuelan terrorists and trafficking networks led by Nicolas Maduro.
Colombian President Gustavo Petro condemned the U.S. military deployment in the Caribbean, calling for a criminal investigation into President Trump for ordering strikes that killed unarmed young people. President Petro highlighted Colombia's shift from a violent war on drugs approach to more efficient anti-narcotics policies, accusing the U.S. of using violence to dominate the region.
It's being said the missiles in the Caribbean were to stop drugs. This is a lie which was said just right here. 2023 and 2024 were the years in which the most cocaine was seized, and more than 700 drug lords were extradited to the US and Europe. It was me who extradited them, and the cocaine was seized by my government. We did not launch a single missile or kill a single young man. Those were the years in which I proved that it was more effective to voluntarily substitute the coca fields and eradicate it with glyphosate and force the poor peasants of Colombia.
And as the Caribbean remains tense in both Caracas and Washington, trade warnings, the militia's mobilization underscores a country bracing for conflict, even as global scrutiny intensifies. President Donald Trump's return to the United Nations was never going to be dull, but this time the drama started even before he reached the podium. Forget geopolitics, Trump says the UN greeted him with a broken escalator and a busted teleprompter. But here's the twist. While Trump painted himself as the victim of faulty machinery, the UN has a different story. So whose version do you believe? Trump's tale of UN sabotage or the UN's account of self-inflicted glitches? Here's more with the story.
If the United Nations thought hosting US President Donald Trump again would be a smooth ride, they clearly forgot to factor in the building's escalators.
President Trump, why did you cancel the meeting with Chuck Schumer?
Or his relationship with teleprompters.
I feel very happy to be up here with you, nevertheless, and that way you speak more from the heart.
Trump arrived at the UN General Assembly with First Lady Melania Trump, only to find himself stuck midway up a sudden frozen escalator.
All I got from the United Nations was an escalator that on the way up stopped right in the middle. If the First Lady wasn't in great shape, she would have fallen, but she's in great shape.
Trump quipped, pointing out that both he and Melania managed to stay upright. The dramatic ascent ended with the president trudging the rest of the way on foot, hardly the grand entrance he probably envisioned. The United Nations has a different version of the escalator fiasco. According to a UN spokesman, the great mechanical drama unfolded when a videographer, part of the US delegation, bravely moonwalked backwards to capture the perfect shot of the first couple and inadvertently triggered the escalator's built-in safety mechanism. The result? A sudden halt mid-climb. Then came the speech. Barely minutes in, Trump complained that his teleprompter had abandoned him.
I don't mind making the speech without a teleprompter, because the teleprompter is not working. I feel very happy to be up here with you, nevertheless.
But this wasn't it. Trump then fired a warning shot with his mouth.
I can only say that whoever's operating this teleprompter is in big trouble.
For a man famous for unscripted riffs, the malfunction turned into another stage prop in Trump's ongoing saga of tech betrayal. Not that it stopped him from lashing out at the world. In his just under an hour address, he argued that recognizing a Palestinian state would reward Hamas. Then, the president went on to pull up Europe for its migration policies and accused it of failing to cut off Russian energy products. He also dismissed climate change as the greatest con job ever. In between these fiery points, he also revisited an old grievance. Trump remembered how he once bid $500 million to renovate the UN complex with marble and mahogany, only to be passed over.
It would be beautiful. I used to talk about, I'm going to give you marble floors. They're going to give you terrazzo. I'm going to give you the best of everything. You're going to have mahogany walls. They're going to give you
The result,
plastic.
according to Trump, terrazzo floors, plastic finishes, and a price tag that ballooned into billions.
They had massive cost overruns and spent between $2 and $4 billion on the building and did not even get the marble floors that I promised them. You walk on terrazzo. Do you notice that? As far as I'm concerned, frankly, looking at the building and getting stuck on the escalator, they still haven't finished the job.
But the UN wasn't about to take all this lying down. Officials reportedly quickly pointed out that Trump's team had actually brought its own teleprompter, and the UN's version was working just fine.
Excellencies, as we are receiving queries, I would like to assure you that don't worry, the UN teleprompters are working perfectly.
Of course, Trump wasn't done. On Truth Social, he declared the speech a great honor and insisted the broken escalator and faulty teleprompter had only made it more interesting.
Why did you cancel the meeting?
Ever the showman, Donald Trump managed to spin technical glitches into part of his performance. Another chapter in his long-running reality series titled Trump versus the World. Because really, only Trump could turn a global stage meant for sober diplomacy into a stand-up routine about bad escalators, dodgy teleprompters, and terrazzo floors.
Whoever's operating this teleprompter is in big trouble.
And here in the nation's capital, on the National Mall, a massive statue depicting President Donald Trump and the late convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein holding hands has suddenly appeared. The 12-foot installation, constructed from a mix of foam, resin, wood, and wire, depicts two men standing on pedestals smiling at one another and seemingly preparing to stroll toward the Washington Monument. Take a look.
Wow. Oh, thank you. Okay.
Now, below the statue are three plaques, including excerpts from a letter that Trump allegedly wrote to Epstein on his 50th birthday. One plaque declares the piece a celebration of what it calls their long-lasting bond, while another marks Friendship Month with two hands forming the shape of a heart. The statue, located at the east end of the mall, quickly drew attention from both residents and tourists, many stopping to take photos or to debate the meaning of the work. And reports say the artist group behind the installation, known as the Secret Handshake, has described it as part of a Friendship Month and said that the statue will remain in place until Saturday. The birthday letter, which reportedly contained bawdy language, a hand-drawn figure of a naked woman, and President Trump's signature, was recently made public by the House Oversight Committee. Now, President Trump has denied writing it, going so far as to sue the Wall Street Journal, which first reported the existence of the letter, for $10 billion, insisting that no such letter or drawing exists. Now, this is not the first provocative piece targeting Trump, however. Since June, two other installations in Washington have been unveiled. These include the so-called dictator-approved statue featuring a golden thumbs-up crushing the Statue of Liberty's crown and a multimedia display known as Gold TV that showed President Trump dancing with various figures, including Epstein. Now, outside the U.S., still images and videos of Donald Trump with Jeffrey Epstein were projected onto the wall of Windsor Castle when the president visited the United Kingdom with First Lady Melania. The White House quickly condemned the new statue, calling it a waste of money and insisting that Trump's only link to Epstein was having him expelled from his private club years ago. A spokesperson said Democrats and the media ignored Epstein's victims for years, while claiming that President Trump has pushed for transparency by releasing thousands of related documents.
Liberals are free to waste their money however they see fit, but it's not news that Epstein knew Donald Trump, because Donald Trump kicked Epstein out of his club for being a creep.
Still, the renewed focus on President Trump's past ties to Epstein have exposed a sensitive issue for the president. Now, despite his repeated attempts to distance himself, the resurfacing of these connections continues to generate political friction. And as the artwork remains on display in one of the most symbolic public spaces in the country, it's becoming abundantly clear that no matter the denials, the Epstein controversy continues to cast a dark, dark shadow over this president and his White House. And today we end in Ecuador, where a prison in Machala erupted into chaos as rival gangs turned cells into a battlefield. Gunfire shook the walls and explosions ripped through the corridors as officers rushed in only to be ambushed. As per officials, one guard was killed while others were taken hostage. In fact, the inmates even blasted a hole in the wall to escape into the streets. For nearly 40 tense minutes, smoke and screams filled the prison. And this is not an isolated incident. Overcrowding, gang rivalries, and the fight for cocaine routes have been fueling the bloodshed across the country. Here's more on the riot and the chaos taking place in the country.
Ecuador's morning broke with thunder, not rain, not storms, but gunshots and screams. Within no time, Machala's prison had turned into a war zone. Inside, rival gangs clashed. Los Lobos, Los Choneros, two of the deadliest criminal organizations in the country. They didn't just want control of the prison. They wanted control of everything far beyond its walls. Guards ran in with their weapons drawn, but the inmates were ready. Shots were fired. One officer was killed, and others were held hostage. In fact, a hole was also blasted in the wall. Some prisoners escaped, but 13 were recaptured. This was 40 minutes of chaos, and even though authorities reclaimed control, but the damage was done. 14 lives lost, 13 prisoners, 1 guard, and 14 more were injured. This happened because Ecuador's prisons are overflowing, built for one, housing double, and inside, gangs are running empires. And the stakes are enormous. Ecuador sits between Colombia and Peru, the world's cocaine giants. Over 70% of the world's cocaine flows through its ports. The gangs fight, blood flows, but money flows faster. Earlier this month, the U.S. labeled Los Lobos and Los Choneros foreign terrorist organizations. The message was clear. Ecuador's gang wars are no longer local, they are global.
Today, we are going to designate the Lobos and the Choneros as terrorist groups. That brings with it a whole series of options that the United States can carry out under our laws. It is a designation we have made today. I can also announce that we are allocating $13.5 million from the Department of State to combat drugs and crime, to support those efforts. On top of that, we are also working now to provide $6 million for drones.
President Daniel Noboa promised a crackdown. Soldiers entered prisons. For some time, it worked. But the Monday incident proved how fragile that peace really was.
Ecuador is going through tough times. We can see that in security. In this case, it's a constant fight, a constant war.
Outside, the city shook. Residents heard explosions, shots, and panic. For years, they've begged for the prison to be moved, and after Monday, those cries grow louder. This isn't just a riot. It's a glimpse into a country transformed. Once safe, now one of the deadliest in Latin America. Over 4,600 homicides have taken place so far this year, a 47% spike from 2024.
At this moment, we don't have security in our country. Our city is in a worse condition because, as you know, Guayaquil, which is where I live, is among the cities with the highest crime rates.
And the cycle never ends. Adolfo Macias, alias Fito, who was country's most wanted fugitive gang leader, escaped, ruled, and was recaptured. Even behind bars, he ran his empire. Rival gangs struck back, prisons became battlefields, and several lives were lost.
The extradition of alias Fito comes less than a month after his recapture and is a major blow to organized crime. The extradition of Macias Villamar, as well as the operations to dismantle criminal economies, are actions that weaken the mafias, and the national government is determined to continue this fight.
The story doesn't end here. Gang violence has plagued the country. As long as Ecuador's prisons burn, so too does the country's peace. And Machala is just the latest chapter.
That's going to do it for us today here at First Post America. We certainly thank all of you for tuning in, not just today, but every day. We hope you have a great day, and we look forward to seeing you right back here again tomorrow.